I'm Michael Shawn, and welcome to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Roger Dykes is a teacher and counselor with a master's degree in family counseling from Texas Tech University. He is the owner of UV Blake Records and has written a book titled Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World. And there's a few more things. Roger was born with cerebral palsy. Now a quadriplegic, he has been confined most of his life to a wheelchair. And for a while, even enjoying a career as a stand-up or sit-down comedian and after-dinner speaker. Disabled? Yes, but you forget about that pretty quickly because Roger thrives. So here is Roger Dykes. I think we should tell the people and give them a clear vision of what is happening here. Roger and I are actually at separate locations. It's okay if I tell them that, isn't it?
Oh yeah, we'll let them in on that little.
And the only reason why that's important to point out is that you have to understand that we are at different locations and we're talking at Zoom, and so I can see Roger, but. For all Roger knows, I'm sitting here in a Batman T-shirt because my camera doesn't work.
And we can also add that he's too cheap to fix it.
Oh, hey, excuse me, Roger. I interrupted you. You go right ahead.
Well, I was just inviting everyone in and hoping they had a great day and explaining that you'd come by as you often do, and you generally have a question or a topic that you want to talk about. So I'll ask you, what's the subject for the day? I
always enjoy talking to my friend Roger Dykes. When there was decided that I could maybe take part in your podcast, I thought, oh, how fun. That would definitely be a fun thing. Well, let's start out right now. You and I have talked about a lot of things in the first few episodes of your podcast. Really, a guy like you that's lived the life that you've lived and accomplished the things that you've accomplished, it's almost hard to know where to begin because all the time we're laying background. We've talked about you and related to some humorous anecdotes of some type or another in your life and the fact that you have worked professionally as a comedian. Not only that, but an after-dinner speaker. How does humor that you are disabled and in a wheelchair and the fact that you are a quadriplegic, yet you use humor to deal with your disability, and has it always had a positive response when you've done that?
Well, it generally has a positive response over time. Initially, people are a little taken back with the idea of someone making fun of disability, even if it's mine, because we live in a society that is very politically correct and very much you do not make fun of different aspects of individuals, be it their race, their religion, or whatever.
Politically incorrect.
I would be most definitely politically incorrect because a lot of people, and there are people who are turned off by that and think it's wrong for me to do it. I see it differently. I see it as a way of breaking down barriers between people. A lot of people are afraid and do not know what to say or do around a disabled person. And I can understand that because while we are gaining in number, unfortunately, because of situations, we're still very much a minority, and everybody doesn't have a friend that's in a wheelchair or blind or deaf or unable to speak or whatever. Well, what do you say to these people? What do you do around them? Everybody doesn't know what to do. So they don't do anything.
All right, let's bring that into perspective for just a minute here.
All right.
You have been introduced in a comedy nightclub atmosphere, and you rolled out onto stage. What was their immediate response?
Dressed in a yellow tuxedo with a sequin vest, the first thought was, he dresses well. But after we got past that, I would usually I always began my routine with current event humor and or people in the audience humor to get them used to laughing. Because if I started with what I call the wheelchair jokes, they didn't laugh because they weren't sure they were supposed to laugh.
So you could just hear crickets at a certain point.
You would hear crickets. I've had friends in the past who were so used to being around me and thought it was fun to be around me because of the joking we did and things like that. Well, I would be in a group or I'd be in a setting and they would introduce me. And they would introduce me with humor, my kind of humor, the wheelchair humor. And before they could get the introduction out, the audience was ready to stone them because they were making fun of the disabled person.
Well, now, how do you break the ice in a situation like that?
Well, I start off by getting you familiar with me that I'm funny. Hopefully you find me funny. Hopefully they found me funny. We do jokes about innocuous things. And then gradually we would get into a story about me as a child or an adult or whatever. I have very varying stories and varying situations.
All right. Now, wait a minute here. I'm going to put you on the spot. A joke about an innocuous thing. Would you give us an example?
Well, an innocuous thing is I did one earlier about you and your cheapness on not having a camera in your computer. It's just a joke about an individual, a person, something that didn't connect to the disabilities at all. We would do political jokes. We do current event jokes, those kind of things that people would relate to, that laugh at. The key to success as a comedian is to get people to start laughing.
Or to begin to accept you as another person, which really gets to the crux of your whole thing. Your book is entitled "Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World." There, you fought that battle immediately when you rolled on the stage.
And depending on, of course, now they've seen pictures of me out in the lobby, if you will. So they're expecting me to be in a wheelchair. That's not a surprise. I was invited on many occasions to speak before teachers, civic groups, things like that. There were no posters. They did not know, other than the description of me, they would not necessarily have seen me in the wheelchair. So that would be a little bit more of a shock when they saw me that way. But again, I'm introduced as a comedian, so they're expecting something funny out of me. But I learned the hard way quickly that I could not begin by doing what I call the wheelchair routines. I had to start off getting them used to laughing, get them comedy, a little comedic secret here. Doing comedy is based on rhythm. People laugh in rhythm. They react in rhythm. You get them used to laughing, and they'll laugh at almost anything before they stop and think, oh, was that funny or not? So you get them used to laughing. Then you begin to bring in the wheelchair jokes. Now, hopefully, in the process of doing the wheelchair material, you are also indirectly educating them into areas they've never thought of before.
Oh, so there's a message to what you did on stage.
There was always, even when I was entertaining in nightclubs, there was still a message that I wanted to get across, and usually was apparently successful in doing it, of thinking about something you've never thought about before.
And ultimately, that message is in this podcast as well.
Right. The message we want to get across is that we have issues, we have problems, we're people. We're normal people in an abnormal situation.
All right. I'm going to jerk you back for just a moment. You're on stage.
Please be careful.
You've done the innocuous jokes. You've broken the ice with your audience, and you're going to roll into some wheelchair stuff. Can you give us an example or two or three of the type of things that you would do? And I know from having been in the entertainment industry that is hard to do. People find out that you're on the radio and they'll go, well, say something. Do the weather for me. And
right.
It's kind of ridiculous, what people will ask you to do. But I'm asking you to do that now. Can you give us an example of some of your wheelchair-like humor, understanding that our studio audience here on this end is not where you're at, but we may need laugh tracks on this show.
I used to beg for laugh tracks.
Okay. Well, can you give us an example of some of your wheelchair humor? How does that work?
Well, one of the things I would talk about would be the situation I had in gaining romantic relationships. It's much more challenging.
Oh my!
To have a romantic relationship when you're in a wheelchair. I know this one. I invited this one girl out for a date, and she stood me up, and I fell over, and she stood me up again, and I fell over. And it was on that particular night I found out how painful romance can really be.
Oh, Roger. These are the sorts of things, what you just went through. People who have the pleasure of knowing Roger personally, and you've been around him any length of time. He may just be sitting at his desk or something. You have a conversation, and this stuff just comes out of him all the time, and he'll usually have you in stitches before you leave. But you use that, don't you? I mean, you used it on stage to frame your message, and you still use it today.
Well, I bring up issues and things that people have never thought about. How does a disabled person do the following things? It's just assumed. For example, when I'm entertaining, they would obviously see me in the best, most flashy clothes at the time I owned.
Right, in the spotlight, so to speak.
Right, it was a spotlight show, and it was meant to be that. Now, none of them ever sat there and went, I wonder how they got all that stuff on him.
Yeah.
I wonder how long it took to get him dressed that way.
And what did have to happen? What has to happen to get him from his home, wherever that is, to being on stage here tonight? Yeah.
Well, when we went on the road, we would take we usually had a motel room or something. And but the thing of it is, this is what everybody does. It's not like that's unusual. The unusual part is I have to have someone do it for me.
Yeah.
And so
in other words, you're always traveling with a caretaker.
Absolutely. And all this is extra work that would not necessarily need to be done if I were in some other profession.
And it would be fair to say extra expense as well. I tell you what, let's do right now. There are, you've got some great pictures of all of this. And at present, there is not a website for this podcast. But that being in mind, you have a Facebook page where some of this stuff has been put up, and you will continue to add things to that. And if anybody would like, they can go to Roger Dykes on Facebook, and that's ROGERDYKES, and they can find you there, and you'll be able to have a lot of that stuff up for them to see. So anybody that's curious, that's a place where you can go look at some of this stuff.
The more you paid, the better I dressed. So
you didn't, what you're saying is you didn't show up in Bermuda shorts.
No, we tried to always look the part. If that's what people paid to see, that's what they got. And at the time, I don't have it now, But at the time when I was entertaining, I also, the wheelchair I was in had been coated with bronze. So it looked gold as well.
Oh, my. Here's the underlying message to all of this stuff that you just said, and that is that you have, and I've known you for so many years, and this is really true. You've always been the consummate professional. Whatever you decided to do, to take on, my understanding of you is that you really are unfamiliar with the term fear at any point. Roger Dykes just barrels ahead when he decides something needs to be done, and he does it in the most professional manner that he's capable of doing. And I think that is a big part of your message. A lot of people would use some of your circumstances as an excuse. And I got to say, Roger, I've never seen you do that. You are aware of your circumstances, but you find ways to accomplish what you set out to accomplish.
Well, I think that is the key to success with anyone. My mother used to say that everyone is disabled. It's just different with different people. Mine is rather obvious. I mean, you would certainly notice me in a crowd. I could try, as many handicapped people do, to lead a normal life, quote, quote, and try to do everything everybody else does in the traditional normal way. But I choose to say, look, I know I'm limited. I accept the limitations because they're part of me. So rather than denying the limitation, I'm going to accentuate it. For example, some people would put a sheet over a wheelchair so you wouldn't notice they were in it. I made mine gold.
That's a good example. Roger, speaking of your mom, there is a story about a birthday party you had when you were 4 years old. Will you tell us about that?
Well, it was we lived out on the farm between Health Center and Abernathy, which that won't mean a lot to some of your listeners. A few of them may know where that is. This was in 1954. At the time, there was a group here in Lubbock. Live radio was a reality back in the day. And they had a 15-minute radio show 5 days a week. And they were called the Serenaders, and were on the radio. They had
old-time radio. That sounds like fun.
Right. And we listened to the Serenaders. And, of course, as they were local celebrities, as a kid, they were people I admired. I never met them, but I admired them. But we had a birthday party, except there were virtually no kids at my birthday party because I've grown up around adults all my life. They were fine, but children got down and ran and played and did things. I was more thinking like an adult thinks. And we had a birthday party with adults. And so they came out and they had their instruments and played their music. And the one thing the part of that I won't ever forget.
This sounds like great fun.
They got out from their knapsack, as it were, the traditional, back then, coonskin cap, and put that on me. And, of course, then they sang the Ballad of Davy Crockett.
My Kingdom for a Picture.
Which at the time was, Davy Crockett was everything. There was no greater star, right, at that time than Davy Crockett. And I was a big, big fan of the Fess Parker's Davy Crockett. That was a big thrill to me to be, of course, I was the star of the show, obviously. I've entertained most of my life, so without knowing it, I was the star of the show, sitting in my high chair, the coonskin cap on.
If that's not tied up in copywriting, perhaps we need to find a copy of Davy. Is that Davy Crockett?
Yeah, that's the one.
Wild Frontier. Is that the one?
Yeah, that's the one. And the one that was most famous at that moment was done by Tennessee Ernie Ford. And
only you would know that, Roger.
Well, it is no doubt tied up in copyright, and I doubt very seriously that you can put it on the
so when I sang it just now, that's probably as good as it's going to get.
I hope. Bless Davy's heart. That's a shame.
There was a Baylor Hospital experience, the domino game.
Most of my childhood was spent going to doctors, which is cerebral palsy, was basically unknown. And my parents were brand new parents. They didn't know what to expect, and they didn't know what was wrong. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what. So we went from doctor to doctor to doctor. So on this one occasion, they had an appointment for me in Dallas at Baylor Hospital. As we would sit in doctors' offices, my parents had developed this routine. Like I said, I've been entertaining all my life. What does the cow say? What does the horse say? What does the chicken say? All the stuff the kids do. And I'm able to go through this whole routine. And the wind-up was I could make the sound of water going out of the sink. And that was the wind-up shot. Okay.
Talent that knew no bounds.
Right.
Roger.
So we did this wherever we were. And, of course, by the time we get about halfway through it, we've got the whole of the waiting room area that we got their attention. And they're enjoying, I guess. I was too young to really know.
Yeah, you've been doing that all your life, Roger.
But they were enjoying what they were hearing. So we go to Baylor. The doctors check me over, and they announced to my mother and dad that they might as well put me in a mental institution, that I will never have the mind of more than a 3-month-old, which, of course, was devastating to my parents. My grandfather said, I don't buy that. We're going to over to Temple, to Scott and White. Scott and White was the other mecca of medical mecca of Texas.
What happened when you went there?
So we go there. The doctors check me over. And their wording was, we're going to call it cerebral palsy. And my mother said, well, I have a question. And they said, yes, Ms. Dykes, what's your question? She said, will he have a mind? And the doctor looked at her and said, whatever made you ask that question? And she said, well, we were just told to put him in an institution and that he wouldn't have a mind more than a 3-month-old. The doctor said, Ms. Dykes, the routine he just did out in the lobby was far above a 3-month-old. That was the only question she asked.
And the book that you have written, and your master's degree, and the record store and music company that you have run, and we could go on and on. A teacher, a trainer, a counselor. It was ridiculous to try to label you that.
There are many people who wish that they could take me back to that same set of doctors.
Yes. Yeah.
And say, I think you misdiagnosed.
Well, just send me an email. Tell them check out your podcast, brother. Okay. Well, look, we're already out of time again. It is always great fun to visit with you, Roger Dykes. Roger Dykes Just Sayin's the name of our podcast. You folks get a chance to share it with a friend. We would appreciate that. This is, I believe, just episode 5 that we are working on now. So it is in the very infancy, but like so many things that Roger Dykes has done throughout his life, it is something else that he thought, that might be fun. And as I look at you on camera right now, Roger, you have a big grin on your face, and we're glad. Roger Dykes Just Sayin, every 3 weeks, Roger puts up a new podcast. If you subscribe to this podcast, you'll get a little heads up when the new ones come along. Also, Roger has an email list. If you would like to be on it, just send it to Roger's Facebook page and let him know that you would like to be on his email list. Anyway, we appreciate all of you listening. Roger,
Appreciate everybody listening. Appreciate everybody dropping in with us for this half hour. And Michael, appreciate you dropping by. And we'll look forward to having you back by in about 3 weeks. We'll see you then.
You've been listening to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. If you'd like to get a message to Roger, his Facebook account is listed as Roger Dykes. Become a friend, or you can send your questions and comments to rogerdykes51@gmail.com. That's ROGERDYKES51@gmail.com. Our podcast reveals a new episode every 3 weeks. Rollout is on Wednesday evening, shortly after dark, Texas time. Join us next time for our next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin. I'm Michael Shawn. On behalf of Roger Dykes, thanks for listening.